So, I like to call myself the fantasy story specialist because I one day hope to be one. Academia is my background. I hoped one day to write my PhD in the fantasy genre alongside writing my first novel. None of that happened, of course. So that's what got me thinking, why not make a YouTube channel instead in everything to do with the fantasy genre? As a writer myself, I know that it can take many elements to make a great story. As a reader, I have enjoyed these elements that make up a great story. However, there is always that one thing that makes a book stand out for me, and it's this special thing that I hope will add to what I will consider the fantasy canon. Of course, with the fantasy genre, many books share many similarities, but there is always that one thing that makes that particular book, film, video game, whatever medium the story is told through special. And as I am trying to compile my own canon of fantasy literature, let's just say it that way, I thought, why not discuss that on this channel? So if you think this might be your thing, please do subscribe, and I hope that you will share this journey with me. So, of course, what better place to start than with J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings? It's actually come back into mainstream discussion right now, what with Netflix planning on releasing The Rings of Power, which is supposedly a modern adaptation of this critical book in the fantasy literature canon. I am still surprised that a book, or actually 3 books, because The Lord of the Rings is made up of The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and of course, The Return of the King, was published all the way back in 1968, and it still plays such a crucial part in popular culture today. The biggest surprise for me with The Lord of the Rings was, of course, its author, J.R.R. Tolkien. Yes, his son did publish The Lord of the Rings trilogy posthumously, which means once his father had passed away. But what surprised me the most was the fact that J.R.R. Tolkien was both a student and a lecturer in Oxford University. This is something I found most curious given my own struggles when it came to my chosen genre, fantasy, and trying to get academia to take it seriously. So, of course, The Lord of the Rings, there is so much that we can discuss when it comes to such a epic story. But there is that one thing that really makes it stand out. So, the hero's journey. This is actually a term that was coined by Joseph Campbell in his book, Hero with a Thousand Faces. The hero's journey is something that you can find in so many stories across the whole world, and it actually comes up again and again in so many different cultures that existed in human history. One might even call it a universal structural narrative. I am sure that we have all read stories which serve as one variation or another to what is essentially the hero's journey. And to put it simply, it is from the hero's journey that we get what we more commonly know from movies, incidentally, as a 3-act structure, or beginning, middle, end. And, of course, the hero's journey is what would make The Lord of the Rings stand out and be such a crucial part of the fantasy canon, because The Lord of the Rings is, in essence, an epic version of the hero's journey. Okay, so as you have just seen, The Lord of the Rings starts with, of course, what we would call the beginning. It's a nice, slow setup in which we can set the scene, really. Sometimes, as a reader who has become so accustomed to just jumping into the action, I almost don't read the setup of stories. This scene in Hobbiton sets up what Frodo's life is like before the big change sets in. As this is the hero about to embark on an epic journey, we, as the audience, need to see from where he starts so that we can understand the transformation and the journey that Frodo is about to embark upon. Hobbiton, such a peaceful and idyllic place. Indeed, it is very reminiscent of the English countryside, and as an English girl myself, I should know. There is, of course, some Nordic influences in The Lord of the Rings, but the setting is from my own United Kingdom, and such an idyllic home is, of course, well, it makes one think, how exactly will Frodo want to leave such an idyllic life behind to embark upon this epic journey? However, there is one plot device that makes Frodo unlike his fellow hobbits, and that is his uncle, Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo Baggins has his own story, which we all experienced in the prequel The Hobbit, where he went on his own epic journey, helped by, of course, the infamous Gandalf the Grey. And, of course, it is because of Bilbo that the other hobbits always seem to look at Frodo with a sort of side eye. Well, apart from Frodo's best friend, Samwise. As Frodo's uncle Bilbo once broke the peace, it is only natural that the other hobbits think that perhaps Frodo will also go down the same path. The whole idea of setting up the beginning of where the protagonist is before he embarks upon his grand adventure is something that we see in all fiction novels. Yes, I know that we have movies that as readers, as the audience, we all want to jump into the action, but we do need that setup. In fact, as a writer, I am having to think more as a writer and less as a reader to include these important pieces of information and to have a strong beginning, to understand where the character comes from, is what then helps the audience understand the development of character that the protagonist goes through when embarking on this journey. And Frodo, of course, changes a great deal on this journey. The call to adventure, something that is prominently marked in Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces. In the case of Frodo, much like his uncle, is once again Gandalf the Grey, the mischievous yet lovable wizard that sets his sight on Frodo. Gandalf in fiction is what we call typical mentor figure. In fact, he probably embodies all of the mentor figures that came after his creation. Being an older character, of course, contributes to him being the mentor. But of course, as we all know, Gandalf's mischievous side does not always make him the greatest of mentors. Well, he's bound to get you into a lot of trouble, but his heart is in the right place. It is surprising that he has such a playful nature, given how much he knows about the seriousness of the situation that their world is in. Their world being, of course, Middle-earth. The ongoing wars between the different races, and of course the great evil Sauron. Now, once Gandalf got Bilbo to go on his own grand adventure, and in the books it is established that Bilbo brought back something, a ring. For once, Gandalf was actually trying to be the responsible mentor and instructed Bilbo to destroy this artifact. And Bilbo, well, sort of didn't do it. But then, how can you blame him for that? With the great power that the ring has over the mind, and this inexplicable need that characters who come across it have to possess it. Of course, Gandalf does try first for Bilbo to still destroy the ring, but when it becomes apparent that Bilbo's mind has been altered by the influence of the ring, Gandalf realizes that another must take the ring who has not yet been influenced by its corrupt power. And this is where Frodo comes in. And Frodo, having always lived in the shadow of his uncle and his great adventures, naturally refuses this call to adventure, which once again is described in A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And there we have it, the crossing of the first threshold. The forces of Sauron are getting stronger. From leaders from the Elven race, the Dwarven race, and other fantastical races need to come together to discuss Sauron's increasing influence over their respective territories. Sauron's territory is Mordor, and for the ring to be destroyed, it has to be taken to Mordor and thrown into the volcano there, because that is the only way to destroy it. Of course, these leaders now engaging more and more with the forces of Sauron, some of them believe anyway, that the ring could be used against its master. One such leader is the son of who is, at that point, the steward, Gondor. He, of course, Gondor being closest to Mordor, but he believes that the ring will turn the tide. However, Gandalf quickly sees just how quickly the evil presence of the ring begins to warp this leader's mind, very much like Bilbo Baggins for him. Gandalf stands witness to the leaders beginning to bicker amongst themselves. This shows that the mere presence of the ring is causing conflict and strife, where it is unity that the leaders need to overcome the forces of Sauron. Gandalf, who, when introduced, seems mischievous and playful, now becomes serious, and he reminds the leaders that the ring is evil, that it can only be controlled by its maker, its master, Sauron, and that none of them there could ever think that they would have the power or the willpower, in fact, to control this ring. Aragorn, who is quickly established as the true heir of Gondor, he is the one that brings these arguments to a close by reminding those present that only Sauron can control the ring, as the others who seek to control the ring will only get corrupted by it. Frodo is actually present at this meeting, the meeting which comes under the banner of the Fellowship of the Ring, which I believe was established in Hobbit. Frodo is still reluctant, of course, to take possession of this ring, up until he sees that these usually clear-headed leaders begin to bicker amongst themselves. This is when Frodo feels the effects of the ring for perhaps the first time, and he realizes that the presence of the ring itself is what is causing the greatest division between these leaders. And as Frodo has no sort of power, leadership position, true stake in matters, he finally offers himself up to take the ring to Mordor, to destroy it. After all, unlike the other leaders, he does not want to control the ring. Of course, Gandalf is most pleased with this, as Frodo has finally answered his call to adventure. So, as you can see, Frodo has, at this point, undergone many trials. He is now on his road of trials, according to Joseph Campbell's book. It is in the middle part of Frodo's journey that he encounters his greatest trial, and that is, of course, Sméagol, who we later on learn was a hobbit, very much like Frodo, but he allowed the ring to warp his mind and for him to commit an unspeakable act against a fellow hobbit. To be honest with you all, I knew about Sméagol long before I knew about the Lord of the Rings. In fact, the way he would say, "My precious." Thinking about it now, that could have been one of popular culture's very first memes, as we would call them today. At that point, Sméagol was just this funny little creature, but when I started to read Lord of the Rings books and watch the movies, I realised that he was a lot more than just that funny little creature. Sméagol is actually a very important part of Frodo's journey, because Sméagol shows Frodo who he could become should he let the corrupt influence of the ring to warp his mind. Because of course, on his road of trials, there are many enemies who wish to snatch the ring for themselves, thinking that they can control its power and perhaps come up against Sauron. But another one of Frodo's many trials is to resist the influence of the ring so that he can throw it into the volcano in Mordor when the time comes. Sméagol is the character, but he is the one who let the ring control him, because of course you can't control the ring, only its master can. And Schmiegel's story, or his backstory, actually made me feel very sad, because he could have been a very decent hobbit up until such an evil thing ended up in his hand. And Schmiegel's constant presence is, of course, Frodo's constant reminder that no matter how hard his road of trials is, he cannot give himself up to the influence of the ring, lest he become like Schmiegel. Gandalf the White. Looks like our mischievous, playful mentor has grown up. Lunging, falling into your death is bound to do that. Though he still has just a hint of mischievousness when he says, yes, I was Gandalf the Grey, but now I am Gandalf the White. Gandalf's return in this fashion, of course, coincides with Joseph Campbell's chapter on the meeting with the goddess. This, of course, is sort of why it brings an ending to Frodo's road of trials as he, little by little, approaches the great climax of the story. However, the great change that happened when Gandalf went from being Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White also reflects the great changes that Frodo has been through, even though he has not quite yet recognised the impacts that this has had on who he is as a hobbit. Yes. Now we are coming towards the climax of the story. And of course, what better movie clip to begin that with than with Sam confronting Schmiegel as he is now convinced that Schmiegel is a great danger to Frodo, even though Frodo did not quite believe it beforehand. Indeed, Gandalf may have been the primary guide for Frodo on his hero's journey, however Schmiegel was the secondary guide. He was sort of light and dark coming together. Dark in the sense that the ring has corrupted him, but light in knowing that he does not exactly want a fellow hobbit such as Frodo succumbing to the same fate that he did. As you can see from this clip, Schmiegel has become two minds thanks to the corruption that the ring has had on Schmiegel's mind, as Schmiegel was a warning to Frodo of what he could become should he give in to the temptation of the ring. Schmiegel was also a representation that when you embark on your own hero's journey, you get to a certain part in your journey where you can no longer be of two minds on the best way to move forward. And especially as this is now coming towards the climax of the story, this is when things get the hardest, and this is when Frodo's determination is what has to carry him across the finish line. And here we have it. Frodo has finally done it. He has finally destroyed the ring once and for all, and whereby once there were many leaders who sought to seek possession of the ring were able to come together to rally around Frodo to aid him on his journey to destroy the ring. And then, of course, by managing to rally around Frodo, they were able to rally together to destroy the forces of Sauron once and for all, just as Frodo destroyed the ring. Frodo, of course, becomes what we now know. Well, it becomes apparent that Frodo has been an underdog all along. He takes on a great responsibility and he rises to greatness because he knows that he is the only one who can do this great feat. Of course, with these leaders, there was Aragorn, the true heir of Gondor, and he finally felt what Aragorn did, that as he fought for the safety and future of Gondor, he was finally fit to become its king. Of course, the climax of The Lord of the Rings happens in third movie, The Return of the King, which is naturally referring to Aragorn. But Aragorn still keeps his modest origins, and he is very right to acknowledge that those great leaders, those great races, would have never been able to come together had Frodo not committed the greatest sacrifice by taking the ring to destroy it and undergoing so many threats to his life and of course his mind. And Aragorn, well, by the act of Aragorn bowing, well, saying that you bow to no one, and then bowing and encouraging everyone else in the crowds to bow alongside him to Frodo and his three companions, sort of shows us as an audience that we can be the underdog in our hero's journey, and that by undergoing our respective journey, we too can receive recognition for our efforts, even if we think that we are not deserving of them. And then there is Frodo. He has not fully crossed the final threshold of returning home until Aragorn does this, to acknowledge the great sacrifice that Frodo has done by taking the ring to destroy it. And it is through Aragorn's actions that Frodo realizes that his journey has come to an end. And now Frodo's journey has come to an end. He has returned home, yet he is very much changed, soon realizing that things cannot simply go back to how they were. Indeed, this happens many times on our own hero's journey, where we undergo such a profound change that where we began can no longer be the same and has to change just as we have changed, or if not, then we have to find a different beginning. Indeed, from the clip that we've just seen, Frodo realizes that he cannot go back to his old life, no matter how much he would have liked to, and no matter how much he thought that he could be like Bilbo and adjust back to the idyllic, quiet life that is in Hobbiton. But then Bilbo was never really able to adjust back to that life either. And this is where the concept of Joseph Campbell's Master of Two Worlds come in. It is not Frodo who becomes the Master of Two Worlds because he is much too changed by his journey. It is not Bilbo whose own journey brought him great riches, but it is in fact Frodo's best friend Sam who becomes the Master of Two Worlds. He started his journey dreaming about what he wanted from his life, to marry, to have children, but never quite plucking up the courage to fulfill this dream of his. However, by being the companion on Frodo's journey, he became changed in the way that he became more confident and more willing just to get up and get what he wanted from life. This means that some of us can adjust back to our old life and make it better, but there are others who are like Frodo and they need to go on to the next adventure. And of course, all of this shows, and I believe it holds true, that it is the prominent, extensive use of the hero's journey in The Lord of the Rings that makes it a crucial part of the canon of fantasy literature today. So there you have it, the beginning of our journey and my very first video here on YouTube. And as this is my very first video, things will only get better from here on out. So please consider subscribing for future videos. Your comments for improvement of this channel and suggestions for any future fantasy stories would also be very much appreciated. However, I hope that the more videos I film, the more my love of fantasy stories will continue to shine through. My two main aims for this channel are the following. First will be to explore what makes other fantasy stories specialist and thus a part of what I consider to be the fantasy canon of literature today. I hope that by doing this, it will become clear what is the unique selling point or the USP of my own fantasy novel series. Second, my hope is to build a connection with an audience who love fantasy genre-based stories just as much as I do. Where are we going next on our journey? Well, we are going to be looking at none other than The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Why, you may ask? Because its author, C.S. Lewis, was an academic exactly like J.R.R. Tolkien was. And as you may remember from the start of this video, the fantasy genre and academia have always had a tenacious relationship, at least from my experience. Until next time.